Hello my dear students. So I'm going to continue the lesson. Under that, now we are going to discuss kingdom plantae. So we started discussing the 3-domain classification by Carl Woese. Under that, we have discussed the first domain, that is domain archaea. Thereafter, we discussed domain bacteria. Then we moved on to domain eukarya. And under domain eukarya, there are 4 kingdoms. You all can remember that. Kingdom protista, kingdom fungi, kingdom plantae, and kingdom animalia. So here I am going to discuss kingdom plantae. So from the name itself, you all know students, the plants belong to this kingdom. It is a kingdom with multicellular organisms known as plants. So when we say plants itself, you have seen so many different types of plants in the environment. You know them. So you normally relate them to the green color because plants, the leaves are always green in color or mostly green in color. There are other colors also. You can remember the mosaic type leaves of crotons and all that. But normally when we say plants, we relate them to green color. What is the reason? Because they have the pigment, green color pigment, chlorophyll, and that is used in producing food by the process of photosynthesis. So those are some features of plants. The organisms that belong to kingdom plantae, and those are all multicellular organisms. So it is a kingdom with multicellular organisms known as plants. And there are about 287,000 plant species. So you can remember, you can understand 287,000 species of plants. So that is a very large number, 287,000 species of plants. Then if we look at the third feature, plant cells possess cell walls with cellulose. You have to remember that compound. What is cellulose? You all can remember students. It is a polysaccharide, a type of carbohydrate. So it's a polysaccharide made up of glucose units. So that is the substance or compound that makes up the cell walls of plants. And you can remember, when we compare the animal cell with the plant cells have a cell wall. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. So under domain eukarya, we have discussed kingdom protista, then we discussed kingdom fungi. So when we were discussing kingdom fungi, you can remember they have a chitinous cell wall. So that then also I told you all students, you all have to compare and understand similarities as well as differences. So kingdom fungi, chitinous cell wall, whereas kingdom plantae, cellulose cell wall. But kingdom animalia, the cells do not have a cell wall. So you have to compare and remember that. Then if we look at the next point, plants appear in green color. So normally we relate it to green color because they possess a pigment called chlorophyll. They possess green color pigments, colored pigments, that is chlorophyll. So you all know chlorophyll is a pigment and they are green colored pigments. So because they have these green color pigments, like plants, even algae has chlorophyll. That also you have to remember. So photosynthesis is carried out by both green plants and algae because they both have the green color pigments, chlorophyll. So they can absorb light energy and produce food by photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. So here you can see students, plants appear in green color because they possess green color pigments. Those are the chlorophyll, and they can absorb light energy and produce food by photosynthesis. And they reproduce by different methods. They can reproduce asexually. Under that we will be discussing natural or what we call as vegetative methods, reproduction, and also they show sexual reproduction. They can reproduce sexually. So plants can reproduce asexually or by sexual methods. So these are the general features of the organisms, those are the plants belonging to kingdom plantae. It's a kingdom with multicellular organisms known as plants, and there are about 287,000 species of plants, and plant cells possess cell walls with cellulose. The plants appear in green color because they possess green colored pigments called chlorophyll. They can absorb light energy and produce food by photosynthesis. Then they reproduce asexually, either natural or vegetative methods, and sexually also they can reproduce. So with this introduction, students, I will move on to the next slide. So here we look at how we can divide kingdom plantae. So mainly the plants in kingdom plantae can be divided as given below. So we divide them as non-flowering plants and flowering plants. From the name itself, you all know, plants that do not produce flowers, they come under non-flowering plants, and plants that produce flowers, they come under flowering plants. So we have two main groups, non-flowering plants and we have flowering plants. Again, the non-flowering plants and flowering plants can be divided further. So the first stage where we divide kingdom plantae is as non-flowering plants and flowering plants. So with that, I will move on to the next slide. We will look at non-flowering plants. Plants that cannot produce flowers are known as non-flowering plants. And these non-flowering plants again can be divided into two groups. So I told you all that according to the ability of producing seeds. So there are non-flowering plants that cannot produce seeds and non-flowering plants that can produce seeds, but those seeds are naked seeds. So based on that, there are two groups: non-flowering seedless plants and non-flowering seed plants. So the two groups are non-flowering seedless plants and non-flowering seed plants. So these are two groups under non-flowering plants. So non-flowering plants, plants that cannot produce flowers, are known as non-flowering plants. And these non-flowering plants again can be divided into two groups according to the ability of producing seeds. And they are non-flowering seedless plants and non-flowering seed plants. With that, students, I will move on to the next slide. So the first group, non-flowering seedless plants. So from the name, students, you all can understand what type of plants they are. They come under the category non-flowering plants, so they don't produce flowers, and seedless plants. So they don't produce seeds as well. Now you all know flowers are the reproductive structures present in plants. So when they don't produce flowers, that means the plant cannot do sexual reproduction. So they will have to reproduce by asexual method. We'll look at the plants. Non-flowering seedless plants, plants that do not produce flowers and seeds belong to this group. So they do not produce flowers and seed. Under that, if we look at the examples, you would have seen most of these plants. We call some of them are known as ferns also. Even in your households, you might be having them in pots. So if you look at the plants, first one here, Pogonatum. Can you see the structure here? This part and this structure all together is the plant. Then we have Selaginella. Selaginella, again, the structure is shown here. It's a plant which is almost growing along with the soil. Then if you take Nephrolepis, you can identify that as a fern. The fern with the leaf structure and all that. Then again Markantia. The Markantia is also almost grows along the soil, the surface of the soil, Markantia. Then we have Salvinia. You're familiar with Salvinia, a plant that grows in water bodies, aquatic bodies, and sometimes they become weeds in aquatic environment. So you have heard about Salvinia. We use the fungus Alternaria to control the growth of Salvinia when it becomes a weed. Then we have Acrostica, again a type of fern. And Drinaria, that's also a type of fern. So these are all the examples. So if we write the examples, again students, you can see these are all written in italics because those are the scientific names. So when we write them, what do we need to do? We need to underline the names. So Pogonatum, need to underline. Then there is Selaginella. That also needs to be underlined. Then I'll write the rest of the names below the pictures. So here we have Nephrolepis. You will need to remember all these names. If you're asked to write the examples, you have to write them. Then we have Markantia or Markantia. Then there is Salvinia, Drinaria, and Acrosticum. So these are the plants that are examples of non-flowering seedless plants. No flowers, no seeds. So with that introduction, students, you have seen these examples. We will go to the lab and we will try to observe some of these plants and see what their structure is. Okay, students. So I told you all I will take you all to the lab to show the non-flowering plants. So this is a different kind of lab setup. So as you all can see, here we have the slide where I have shown you all the non-flowering seedless plants. So the examples you all know: Markantia, Pogonatum, Selaginella, Nephrolepis, Salvinia, Acrosticum, and Drinaria. So here some of them, they have the thallus structure where there is no tissue differentiation. But the ferns have tissue differentiation. So now I am going to show you all two examples of ferns. Here you can see, students, this is a Nephrolepis plant. Can you all see the plant? Here you can see the stem of Nephrolepis and you can see the leaves. So you can see there is a tissue differentiation. They will have the roots also. So this is a fern type plant with tissue differentiation. But you all know Markantia that is shown in the diagram, that is a thallus structure. So if you look at this plant, they reproduce by spores. So normally when you turn the plant this way, at the back of the leaves, here you will see like a line, all the spores will be arranged. You will see like black color or dark brown color spots. But in this particular Nephrolepis, it's not visible. So I will show you all the spores using a different fern. This is also a Nephrolepis leaf when it is young. So as it grows, you can see the size of the plant increases, but still it can increase only to a certain height. Then I have another fern. So this also has the stem structure and the leaves. So that means they have the tissue differentiation that you can understand. So in this also, if we rotate the leaves or we look at the back of the leaves, we should be able to see the spores. So in this leaf again, there are no spores. I will show you all another one with the spores. So here, now you all can see clearly, students. These are the dots that you see here. Those are the spores in almost all the leaves. Here you can see here around the shape of the leaf, you can see all the spores arranged. So those are the reproductive structures, reproduction by spores. Is that clear to you all now? So non-flowering seedless plants, they reproduce by spores, and spores are usually present at the bottom surface of the leaf. Here students, I have a small Nephrolepis plant. So here you can see. Now this is the leaf with the stem, a very young plant. So you can see that, and also this is the root of the Nephrolepis plant. Then you can see the stem and the leaf. So from this you can understand the ferns have a tissue differentiation. Okay students, so by looking at the plants, now you have an idea about the different types of plants. Those are non-flowering seedless plants. So with that, I will move on to the next slide. So here we have the classification. How we classify kingdom plantae. You can remember students, under domain Eukarya. Those are the organisms where they have a cell with an organized nucleus or well-defined nucleus. Those are the eukaryotes. So they come under domain Eukarya. Under that there were 4 kingdoms. You can remember that. Kingdom Protista, Kingdom Fungi, Kingdom Plantae, and after this we will be discussing Kingdom Animalia. So under Kingdom Plantae, all the organisms, they are plants, mainly green plants. And green plants or plants, they can be divided into 2 main types based on whether they can produce flowers or not. So what do we have here? No flowers means it has to be non-flowering plants. Non-flowering plants. Then we have the other type with flowers, that is flowering plants. Flowering plants. How do we classify the non-flowering plants? Based on whether they produce seeds or not. So if they don't produce seeds, what we looked at in the previous slide, Selaginella, Salvinia, Nephrolepis, Marcantia, all of them are seedless plants. Seedless plants. Then we have seeds that are not covered by a fruit. So those are the seeded plants or seed plants. The examples for seed plants are cycas and pinus. We will be discussing this particular group of plants after we discuss the non-flowering seedless plants. Then we have the flowering plants. So as I said, flowering plants, the flowers are there, the sexual reproductive structures. After fertilization, the flowers produce fruits. So there, from the fruits and seeds, the new plants grow. So in the seed, there is the structure cotyledon. Based on the number of cotyledon, we can divide the flowering plants into 2 main types. When there are 2 cotyledons, we call them dicots. If there is 1 cotyledon, they are known as monocots. So if they have 2 cotyledons, they are known as dicots. Dicots or dicotyledonous plants or dicotyledonate plants. What are the examples? You can think of mango, mango tree, papaya or pepper. These are all dicot plants. Then we have the monocots. Again, monocots, monocotyledonous plants or monocotyledonate plants. What are the examples? You can remember grass, coconut tree, palmyra tree, then even paddy. All these come under monocots. So I will write grass and paddy here. So this is how we classify the kingdom plantae, the main classification. Plants, non-flowering and flowering plants. Under non-flowering, we have seedless plants and seed plants. Under flowering plants, we have dicots and monocots. So with that introduction, students, I will move on to the next slide. So here we have the features of non-flowering seedless plants. Now you might be wondering, in the previous slide when I filled the boxes, in the first box we had non-flowering plants, then we had the seedless plants separately. But when you refer to them individually, we combine the two. Non-flowering seedless plant, non-flowering seed plant. But when we refer to monocots and dicots, we don't have to say flowering monocots and flowering dicots. We just refer to them as monocots and dicots. So features of non-flowering seedless plants. Under that we have the feature in the first column and the special facts. So here you can see the first one is structure. Now if you look at the plant, when I showed you all the plants, you can remember Marcantia. Marcantia was like a scale-like shape plant, something like this you were able to see. So here there is no particular tissue differentiation. The plant itself is growing along the surface of the soil and it doesn't have very defined tissues, or tissue differentiation is absent. Then what do we call that structure? We call them as thallus structures or thalloid structure. This is a thallus body form or thalloid structure. Then you can remember I told you all Drinaria, Nephrolepis, they have a fern type body. So when we say fern type body, if you look at the leaves, now this is the plant and here you will see these long leaf-like structures. Like this you can see the leaves. So that gives rise to the fern type structure. Here of course there is tissue differentiation. So this is a fern type. So they can be small to large size plants. I am here small to large size plants. So we can have the thallus structure, a very small plant. Even the ferns, you would have gone to these botanical gardens, you would have seen the ferns, very short ferns. Sometimes you get very tall ferns. So you can have small to large sized plants. Some plants lack tissue differentiation. So that is the thallus structure. They lack tissue differentiation. So that means there is no stem, leaves or roots. The whole plant is like a one particular structure, no tissue differentiation. These plants are known as thallus. So that is important. That is the thallus structure. Then some plants possess differentiated vascular tissues. So some of them have vascular tissues. What are vascular tissues? Tissues that transport substances. So some plants, they have vascular tissues. So they possess stem, leaves and roots. Is that clear to you all? So those are the fern type plants. So we have the thallus structure and fern type. That's the structure. Then we have the shape. So from the structure, if you look at the shape, they have either thalloid body shape or fern type body shape. No tissue differentiation, thallus, so thalloid body form. Then if they have tissue differentiation, they are fern type plants. And those can be small ferns or large ferns. If we go to the next point, that is nutrition. Now all these are plants. We discussed before also, they all have the pigment chlorophyll. Because of that, they can do photosynthesis. So they are autotrophic, photosynthetic. Autotrophic, photosynthesis. Autotrophic, they can produce their own food and they do this by the process of photosynthesis. You all know what photosynthesis is. In the presence of light, inside the chlorophyll, using carbon dioxide and water, plants produce glucose as the main product, evolving oxygen as the byproduct. So that process is what we call as photosynthesis. So photosynthetic or autotrophic photosynthetic plants. And some of these plants are epiphytes. What are epiphytes? These are plants that grow on a surface, a substrate, say a stem of a tree or on the wall, in order to get enough or in order to be exposed to more sunlight. So in a place where in a rainforest, there are a lot of plants and the plants are more dense. So then of course these epiphytes grow on top of a tall tree, so that it can be exposed to sunlight. But these epiphytes do not act as parasites. They don't absorb anything from the substrate. If it is another plant, they don't take anything from the plant. Only thing, they use the plant as a surface to grow on, so that they will be exposed to light. So those are epiphytes. Some of these plants are epiphytes. Even some of the ferns are epiphytes. Drying area, you might have seen them growing on top of a tree or on a taller surface, higher elevation. So those are some examples for epiphytes. Then if we look at the reproduction, they can undergo asexual reproduction by spores. Now when I say spores, you can remember the Nephrolepis plant. Now Nephrolepis, the leaf, it's here. This part is the leaf. So here at the back of the leaf, you can see this dark brown color or black color spherical like structures. Those are the spores. And those spores involve in asexual reproduction. Then what is fragmentation of vegetative parts? Now if we take a thallus structure, something like this, a thallus. Now part of this thallus can come off and this part will grow into a new plant. So this part is what we call as fragment. And the fragment develops into a new plant. So that is by fragmentation. Reproduction by spores, reproduction by fragmentation, both are asexual reproduction. So this is done by vegetative parts. What do you understand by vegetative parts? Now as I told you, flowers are the reproductive structures or reproductive parts. Here there are no flowers. So all parts of the plant come under vegetative parts except for flowers, that are the sexual reproductive parts. So here you can see spores under the leaves. Here the thallus itself undergoes fragmentation. So that is why we say asexual reproduction by spores and fragmentation of vegetative parts. And perform sexual reproduction too. Here sexual reproduction not by flowers. A different type of sexual reproduction. That is also possible. Female gametes and male gametes, if they are produced by the plants, then they can undergo sexual reproduction. So both methods are possible. Then if we look at the distribution. Now here they are distributed in terrestrial environments, that is land area, but where there is less sunlight and more moisture. So you can see terrestrial environments with low sunlight, shady and wet places, because they don't have a very highly developed tissue structure. They can be either thallus or fern type. So for them to grow, they need to have a shady area, not too much sunlight. They do need sunlight to produce their food, but not too much. So they always grow in places with low sunlight, shady and wet environment, but terrestrial environment, not in water bodies, not in the aquatic environment. So those are the features of the first group, that is non-flowering seedless plants. If you quickly go through that, they can be large or small size plants. Some don't have tissues, so they are known as thallus. Some have the tissue differentiation, stem, leaves and roots. So those are the fern type. Because of that, shapes are thalloid body or fern type body. Then nutrition, all are autotrophic and photosynthetic. And some are epiphytes in order to get sunlight. Then reproduction, asexual reproduction by spores, fragmentation of vegetative parts, or it can be sexual reproduction. Then distribution, terrestrial environment with low sunlight, shady and wet environments. So those are the features that you need to know regarding non-flowering seedless plants. With that, students, I will move on to the next slide. Here we discuss the second type, non-flowering seed plants. So they don't produce flowers, but they produce seeds, but the seeds are not covered by a fruit. The seeds of these plants are not covered by a fruit. That is very important. The seeds of these plants are not covered by a fruit. Seeds are naked. Because of that, we call them gymnosperms. So when there are seeds that are not covered by a fruit, the seeds are known as naked seeds, and because of that, the plants are known as gymnosperms. So under gymnosperms, there are two examples that you need to remember. The cycas plant and the pinus plant. So cycas and pinus. You would have seen these plants. Both these plants have a cone-like structure. We normally call it the pine cone. Sometimes even as decorative ornaments, we use these pine cones. Even for Christmas decor, they take this pine cone. Similar to that, you will see a cone in the cycas as well. So cycas and pinus plants, they are both examples of gymnosperms. Non-flowering seed plants where the seeds are naked seeds. Seeds are not covered by a fruit. So now that you have an understanding of these two plants, we will watch a video where you can see the two plants. So you can get a better idea about their features. Okay, students. So by watching the video, now you have an idea about the features of this plant. So now we will look at the features of gymnosperms. Features of non-flowering seed plants. Non-flowering seed plants. So first, if we look at the feature, that is the structure. So special facts regarding these features are given to you. So under structure, again we discuss the tissue differentiation. So here, of course, there is true tissue differentiation. Unlike the previous group, there was no true tissue differentiation, but here there is. So true tissue differentiation is present. Therefore, they possess vascular tissues. Root, stem and leaves are present. So even in the cycas plant and the pinus plant. Now, if I go back to the previous slide, here you can see, students, these are the leaves, well-developed leaves, and here you can see the stem of the plant. So there you can see the tissue differentiation. And this plant, those are somewhat woody plants, so they have to be rooted strongly. The root system is below the soil. So they do have the true tissue differentiation. That is the presence of root, stem and leaves. And also they do have the vascular tissues. So you know the function of vascular tissues. They are present for transportation of materials. Then if we take the shape, these are normally large in size. They are large plants. So even the cycas plant, pinus plant, you would have seen them. They are somewhat large and they are woody plants, and most of them are trees. You know the meaning of trees. When you look at a tree, you can see the woody stem and you can see the leaves separately. There is a strong root system. So those are the trees. And here they have a straight woody stem. And some can be shrubs. Some are shrubs. So most of them are trees. The cycas, pinus, they are mostly straight woody stemmed trees. Whereas there can be some shrubs. What are shrubs? Shrubs are also plants with a woody stem, but they are normally shorter in size. So those are the shrubs. So they can be also seen under non-flowering seed plants. Then we have the nutrition. Again, you all know they are all autotrophic and photosynthetic. Why? They again have chlorophyll, so they do photosynthesis. Then if we look at the reproduction, sexual reproduction by seeds. So here seeds are produced. So sexual reproduction, but the seeds are not covered by a fruit. So they are naked seeds. That's why we call them the gymnosperms. Then asexual reproduction by spores. So both types of reproduction are there. Sexual reproduction by naked seeds and asexual reproduction by spores. Then if we look at the distribution, they are distributed in terrestrial environment. So they are in terrestrial environment. Now you all can understand the evolutionary process also, students. Most of the groups that we looked at before, they were either in the aquatic environment or they needed moist environment. But now, when we started discussing plants, the first group, non-flowering seedless plants, they live in areas where there is less sunlight, moist environment, but here they are distributed in terrestrial environment. So little by little you can understand the plants are spreading throughout the terrestrial environment, inhabiting different habitats. So here these are the features of non-flowering seed plants. They have true tissue differentiation, they have vascular tissue, they are large in size, most of them are trees with straight woody stems and some are shrubs, and they are all autotrophic and photosynthetic, and they reproduce sexually by seeds and asexually by spores, and they are distributed in the terrestrial environment. So with that understanding, student, we will move on to the next slide. So here we will compare the two types of plants, non-flowering seedless plants and non-flowering seeded plants. If these are the properties that we discussed before also. So both of them do not have flowers. So flowers are absent in both plants. And seed is absent in seedless plants, whereas the non-flowering seeded plant has seeds. Nature of seeds, since it's absent here, but in gymnosperms they are naked seeds, or they are not covered by a fruit. Then you can see size of plants. Here it's small to large, but non-flowering seeded plants mostly trees or shrubs. So here you can remember they are either trees or shrubs. And here you can remember they were either thalloid structures or fern type structures. So if we look at the plant structure, again here you can see thallus with no tissue differentiation, or you can see some plants possess differentiated vascular tissues and stems, leaves and roots. So those are the fern types. So both types are there under non-flowering seedless plants. So if you look at the non-flowering seeded plants, there is true tissue differentiation. This is important. Compared to here, they have true tissue differentiation. They also possess the vascular tissues, and root, stem and leaves are present. So I am sure you will be able to understand the similarity and differences between non-flowering seedless plants and non-flowering seeded plants. So when I started the lesson itself, I have told you all, when you study different groups, try to compare them. Try to understand the similarities as well as the differences. So with that, I will move on to the next slide. Here also there are some more features. So shape, again thalloid or fern type, whereas non-flowering seeded plants, trees, straight woody stems and some are shrubs. Then nutrition, both of them are autotrophic photosynthesis. They are all autotrophic photosynthesis. Only some of these are epiphytes. Now, seedless plants, some of them are epiphytes. Then reproduction, here they reproduce asexually by spores, fragmentation of vegetative parts, and they show sexual reproduction. That is the seedless plants, whereas seeded plants, they reproduce by seeds, that is sexual reproduction, and asexual reproduction by spores. So both the types show both sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction, but the way they carry out the reproduction is different between seedless plants and seeded plants. Then if we look at the distribution, here of course terrestrial environment, but with low sunlight, shady and wet places. That is important. Whereas here we just normally say terrestrial environment. So again you can understand the similarity and the difference. So examples for non-flowering seedless plants without seeds. So Marcantia, Pogonatum, Nephrolepis, Acrosticum, Selaginella. Selaginella, there should be only one L. You all know to write the names of all these plants, students. So Selaginella, we need to underline it also because it's a scientific name. You all remember, you have to underline. There should be only one L here. So then we have Salvinia and Drinaria. These are all examples of non-flowering seedless plants. Whereas under non-flowering seeded plants, we have Cycas and Pinus. Two main plants that you need to remember. So with that, students, I think you all would have got a good understanding about the two types of or two groups of plants that fall under non-flowering plants. So with that, I will move on to the next slide. Here we discuss the flowering plants. So from the name you all know, they are plants that produce flowers. So because they have flowers and they produce seeds that are covered by a fruit, and that's a very well developed seed and fruit, we call them as angiosperms. So plants that produce flowers are known as flowering plants. The seeds that are produced by flowers, which is the sexual reproductive structure of flowering plants, are covered by a fruit. Therefore, they are termed covered seed plants or angiosperms. So this is what I explained. The seeds are there, they are produced from the flowers. Flowers are the sexual reproductive structures. So there is the male part and the female reproductive parts. There will be fertilization. After fertilization, there is the production of seeds. And when the seeds are produced, it's actually the flower that is converted to the seed and the fruit. So the seed is covered by the fruit, so they are not naked, and we call them covered seed plants or angiosperms. Under angiosperms, if we look at their features, these plants are well adapted to life on land. Very important. Now, you can remember, students, I told you all the first group, non-flowering seedless plants, they were in the terrestrial environment but with less sunlight and more moisture, shady environment. Whereas the gymnosperms, they moved to the terrestrial environment, but the angiosperms are well adapted to live on land and show various adaptations to conserve water. This is something you have learned before also. Why do they need to conserve water? If they live in an environment where there is scarcity of water or the temperature is high, then there is a possibility of high transpiration, loss of water from the plant due to evaporation. So to prevent that, you can remember they have a waxy cuticle, a thick waxy cuticle. Then sometimes their leaves become spines. Then they can have less number of leaves. So like that, they can have different types of adaptations to conserve water. So that is something you have to remember, students. Sometimes even the leaves are absent and the stem becomes green in color and does photosynthesis, photosynthetic stems. So you are familiar with all these concepts. So then, if we look at the types of plants that belong to flowering plants, now you can look at these two plants. You are familiar with them, coconut tree and a mango tree. Now coconut tree, you have seen coconut trees, the stem is a cylindrical structure and usually the diameter is the same. And here you can see there is no branching. Then you would have observed the leaves of the plant. they have the parallel venation. So like that, you would have identified some features. You have learned these features in your previous grades also. Whereas if you take the mango tree, now this mango tree has branching. Their stem is not cylindrical like the coconut tree. Then if you look at the leaves, they are different and they have reticulate venation. The veins are like a network structure and they have different types of flowers. If you observe the root system also, they have different root system. Why is that? Because they belong to two different groups. What are the groups? Monocots and dicots. How do we classify them? Based on the number of cotyledons present in the seed. If there is only one cotyledon in the seed, we call it monocots or monocotyledonous plants or monocotyledonate plants. If they have two cotyledons, then we call them as dicots or dicotyledonate plants or dicotyledonous plants. So they can be divided into two groups according to the number of cotyledons in the seed. So according to the number of cotyledons in the seed. So if we write the names, monocotyledonate plants and dicotyledonate plants. Monocotyledonate plants and dicotyledonate plants. So coconut is a monocot plant, whereas mango tree is a dicot plant. So I am sure you all remember that and you are familiar with that concept and you know many more examples for these plants. Now we will try to understand their features. So here we have an activity. You need to uproot a paddy or grass and the Coppermania or Coppermania plants and wash their root system carefully and list out their features. So how do you uproot the plant? Do you just pull it out from the soil? No, then you can damage the root system. So what we do is we pour a little bit of water to the soil, water the soil so that the soil becomes more soft. If it's dry, it's difficult to pull the plant out. Then you have to pull up the plant or uproot the plant without damaging the root system. So here paddy or grass, that is the monocot plants. You can use one of those there. That is an example for monocot plants. Whereas Coppermania is an example of dicot plant. So then you have to observe their features carefully. And then you need to tabulate those features. So this is a simple activity, students. We will first do it in the lab and then we will list down the features. Okay, students. So again, I told you all we will do this activity. We will observe paddy or grass for monocot plants and Coppermania or Coppermania plant for the dicot plant. So here I have both the plants. First, I will show you all the paddy plant. So here I have a small paddy plant, students. Can you all see this? So can you have a look at the roots here? What is the type of root? It is the fibrous root. You all can identify that. It does not have a tap root or lateral roots. All the roots here you can see are starting from the base of the stem. So it is the fibrous root. It is clearly visible. Then we have the stem and the leaf here. So here you can see there is no branching. I will show you all a larger plant, the paddy plant. So here students, you all can see the fibrous root. All the roots starting from the base of the stem. Then we can look at the stem of the plant. Is it branched? The stem is not branched. So then if we look at the leaves, so here students, if you look at the leaf closely, you can see the veins going parallelly. The parallel venation in plants, parallel venation of leaves. So that also you can identify. So in this paddy plant, you all were able to observe the fibrous root, then the thin stem being unbranched, and thereafter you can observe the parallel venation in leaves, and these are the paddy grains that you can see. If we compare this with the Cupomania plant. Now here I have a Cupomania plant. In this, if we start with the root system, you can identify the taproot here and all the lateral roots. Can you all see that clearly, students? I'm sure you're familiar with this, but you all can observe it clearly. Then if you look at the stem, now here you can see the stem is branched. Now there is a branch here, then you can see some other branches. This is a very young plant, students, so that's why you can't see lot of branches, but somewhat grown plant you will see more than one branches. Then if you look at the leaf, now if I show you all the leaf here, you will be able to observe the reticulate venation, a network-like venation. Can you all see that? So in this plant, the Cupomania plant, there is taproot with lateral roots, stem is branched, and also you are able to observe the reticulate venation. Then, if we compare the two plants, and normally this is visible when the plants are grown and very mature, you will see in the dicot plant, the base of the stem, this part of the stem will be broader and the tip of the stem will be thinner. Whereas in monocot plants or plants like paddy and all that, the thickness or the diameter of the stem will be even. So those are differences that you see between a Cupomania plant and a grass plant or a paddy plant. So from that, students, you all can understand the difference between dicot plants and monocot plants. So grass or paddy, the first two plants, those are monocots, whereas the Cupomania plant is a dicot plant. And those are some of the features that differ in these two monocot and dicot plants. So you all were able to understand the features of paddy or grass and Cupomania plant. So paddy or grass, I told you all, is a monocot plant, whereas Cupomania is a dicot plant. I'll write down some of the features that we observed. So here we had the monocot plant. I will just write it as paddy or grass because when you all do the activity, you might be able to observe paddy or sometimes grass. But both of them have similar features. And on this side, we have the Cupomania plant. So students, you all can remember looking at the plants, the grass or the paddy plant, did they have branching in their stem? No. But if you look at the Cupomania plant, you were able to see some branches there. Although it is a very small plant, all these plants are small plants, so you can observe them easily and you were able to understand whether there was branching or no branching. So paddy or grass plant, there was stem is unbranched. Whereas in the Cupomania plant, stem is branched. Then, we were able to look at the leaves. And here, paddy or grass plant, you can remember the leaves are very thin and long. And in that, you would have observed the venation, that is a parallel venation. So paddy or grass has parallel whereas when you looked at the Coopermania leaf, how was it? It was more shorter compared to the leaves of the grass and paddy, and also it was more broader. And what was the type of venation there? It was reticulate venation. You were able to see reticulate venation in leaves. So here also we can say parallel venation in leaves. Then, what did we observe after that? The root system. And what was the root system that you saw in grass or paddy? It was the fibrous root. There was no taproot, there were no lateral roots, but there was the fibrous root. So here we can say fibrous root system. Root system. And here there was taproot system. So from these students, you all can understand the different features. So we take the paddy or grass plant. You can see there is the unbranching in the stem, parallel venation in leaves, and the fibrous root system. And here the stem is branched, there was reticulate venation in the leaves, and also it was the taproot system. Why is this difference? All the features, the root, stem, leaves, everything is different. Even if you look at the flowers, they will also be different. The reason is paddy or grass, as you know, is a monocot plant, whereas Coopermania is a dicot plant. So when you observe monocot or dicot plants, they have very distinct features. So by looking at the plant itself, you can easily identify whether a plant is a monocot plant or a dicot plant. But there can be a few exceptions. For example, if you look at a papaya tree, there is no branching in the stem. It is an unbranched stem, but it is a dicot plant. With a few exceptions like that, most of the features are very specific to dicots and monocots. So with that introduction, students, now we will try to understand all the features of monocots and dicot plants. So we will discuss the features of monocots and dicots. So here I have tabulated the features in the first column. Then we have the monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants. Or you can remember monocotyledonate plants and dicotyledonate plants. So under that, if we look at the first feature, cotyledons in the seed. How many cotyledons are there? In monocots, there is only one cotyledon. In dicots, there are two cotyledons. Then if we look at the stem, we saw it in the activity as well. The stem is unbranched. And in dicot plants, the stem is branched. So here students, I am writing the specific feature in a short way so you can understand the feature easily. Then we looked at the root system. What was the root system present in monocots? It is the fibrous roots. There is no taproot. So here there is no taproot and there is fibrous root. Fibrous root system. And here we have the taproot system with lateral roots. You all know the structure of all these. Now stem being unbranched and branched, you would have seen the branching. Then tap roots and fibrous root systems. What are those? Normally when you look at the stem of a plant, if there are many roots starting from the end of the stem, that is a fibrous root. Fibrous root. Whereas you look at a dicot plant, you see a root like this with the lateral roots and the root hairs, everything. So this is a tap root. And these are the lateral roots. So you're familiar with the two types of roots. In monocots there is the fibrous root, and in the dicots there is the tap root with the lateral roots. Then the next one is leaf venation. So before I write that, I will explain the venation also. I'm sure you're very familiar with leaf venation. Now if you take the monocot leaves, we have the midrib like that, and then the veins are parallel like this with the leaves. Now if you take the coconut leaf, you get the midrib and the leaves are like that. So there we have the parallel venation. This is a parallel venation. Whereas you take the dicot leaf, the midrib is in the middle, then you get the branches, and you can see these are all like a network-like structure. You get a network-like structure. So that is what we call as reticulate venation. Reticulate venation. So parallel venation in monocots, reticulate venation in dicots. So that is the next characteristic. So when we look at the leaf venation, in monocots we have parallel venation, and in dicots we have reticulate venation. Then if we take the flowers, the monocots have trimerous flowers. What are trimerous flowers? Trimerous flowers. Whereas the dicot plants have tetra or pentamerous flowers. What is the meaning of trimerous and trimerous, tetramerous, pentamerous? If you take the flowers, they have the petals. If you count the number of petals, if it is trimerous, it's either 3 or multiples of 3. 3, 6, 9, like that you will have number of petals. Whereas in dicot plants, it's tetramerous means 4. Pentamerous is 5. So either 4 petals, 5 petals, or multiples of 4 or 5 petals. That's the difference between the flowers in monocots and dicots. So then, if we look at the next feature, secondary growth. So students, you all need to understand what secondary and primary growth are. From the seed, when the plant grows into the mature plant, that is the primary growth. And after that, normally the dicot plants, every year they undergo secondary growth. That is why the stem of the dicot plants become wider and wider. That is because of the presence of a tissue called the cambium tissue. You will learn this in more detail when you go to grade 11. But for now, just remember the diameter of the stem increases due to the secondary growth. But that is not seen in monocot plants. So when we say secondary growth, it is absent. Absent in monocots, whereas you can see secondary growth in dicot plants. Growth takes place. The next one, stem diameter. Now I explained this to you all before also. When you look at a monocot plant, the diameter of the stem is uniform throughout the plant and usually it is a circular stem. But if you take the dicot plants, you can see at the base of the stem, it's more broader and towards the tip of the plant, the diameter of the stem decreases. So here, stem diameter is even throughout the stem. Here we can say base is broader and becomes thin towards the tip. So that is how the branch of the dicot plant is. Then the last one is the example. You are familiar with all these monocot and dicot plants. For monocot, what we saw before, we can consider grass, paddy, coconut, and we can even take areca nut. All these are examples of monocot plants. If you take the dicot plants, again we can take mango, papaya, then coppermania plant, all these are examples of the dicot plants. So by looking at the plant itself, you can easily identify whether they are monocots or dicots. I will go through the features again. Cotyledons in the seed, there is one cotyledon in monocots and two cotyledons in dicots. Stem is unbranched for monocots, it's branched for dicots. Then root, there is no taproot, but there is fibrous root system in monocots. Taproot system with lateral roots are found in dicots. Leaf venation, there is parallel venation in monocot plants and reticulate venation in dicot plants. Flowers are trimerous flowers in monocots and in dicots, it's either tetramerous or pentamerous flowers. Secondary growth is absent in monocots, it's seen in dicot plants. Then stem diameter is even throughout the stem in monocots, whereas the base is more broader and it becomes thin towards the tip of the plant. And as examples, we can consider grass, paddy, coconut, areca nut, all that for monocots. And for dicots, we have mango, papaya, coppermania plant, all these are examples of dicot plants. Even shoe flower, pichamal, all those are examples of dicot plants. So you can take any of the examples. I am sure students, with this explanation, now you all have an idea about the features of monocots and dicots. So as I told you all before, by looking at the plant, you should be able to identify whether it's a monocot plant or a dicot plant. For that, you have to observe all these features. So according to the scientific classification, you all know they consider all the characteristics. Now most of these are the morphological characteristics. But in addition to that, physiology, cytology, everything is considered. So with that understanding, students, I will move on to the next slide. So there is an assignment. Prepare dried collection of plant parts belong to flowering and non-flowering plants. So normally, when we get a dry plant collection, you all are familiar with this also, that is called the herbarium. You can remember that term, herbarium. Now, how do you make this herbarium? If it's a very short plant, a shrub or a herb or a very tiny fern, you can uproot the whole plant. without damaging the root, then what do? We keep it between newspapers and keep a weight over that, and like that we need to keep it. We need to press it for few days or sometimes weeks until it becomes dry as well as it gets pressed. But when it gets pressed, you have to make sure you can see the shape of the leaf. Then you should be able to identify the flowers. So you can do it as a whole plant itself. But if it is a large plant like a mango tree, then of course that's not possible. Then what we can do is we can take a leaf, a flower, all those can be taken separately. Even some of the seeds, some fruits can be dried and used, but not all fruits. It depends. We can get the root system, part of the root system from a young plant. All those can be pressed. So to make the herbarium, we need to press the plant or plant part. Then what do you need to do? You need to arrange it and paste it onto large sheets of paper, mostly the very cardboard paper or like the A4 boards. You can use boards, and on that you paste these plant parts. Paste them. We paste them on a cardboard. And after that, what should you do? You have to include all the information. You should say what part you have pressed, that is the dried collection, and then you have to write the name of the plant, give information regarding the plant. All that is very important. So when you have the information only, you can go back and identify the plant as well as use it as a reference. Say you find another flower or a fruit or a leaf, then you can bring the leaf and compare with all these dried collection, and then you will be able to identify to which group that particular leaf or the part of the plant belongs to. So that is the whole purpose of making this dried collection. One thing, you collect them, so you get a lot of idea, you get lot of information, and when you press them and make the herbarium, you have a solid information. You can always refer that, and also you can use it as reference to identify new plants that you may not have seen before. So then you at least know to which group or which category that plant belongs to. So here we need to include all the information. All the information. Under these, students, there are standard ways of making the herbarium, but since you are doing this as an activity, you all can make it in a way that is very creative and that gives more information. So I am sure you all can come up with many ways as to make this dried plant collection more attractive as well as more informative. So with that, students, I have come to the end of this chapter. We started the lesson by discussing artificial and natural classifications, and under natural classifications, the most accepted 3-domain classification by Carl Woese is what we are discussing. Under that, we discussed the domain Archaea, then we discussed domain Bacteria, and then we moved on to domain Eukarya. Under the domain Eukarya, as you know, there are 4 kingdoms: kingdom Protista and kingdom Fungi. We discussed that in the previous chapter. And in this chapter, I concentrated on kingdom Plantae. Under kingdom Plantae, we mainly divided that into 2 types: the non-flowering plants and flowering plants. And then the non-flowering plants were divided as non-flowering seedless plants and non-flowering seed plants. Under flowering plants, we discussed the monocots and dicots. So with all that information, now you all are very capable of understanding and identifying the different types of plants with their features. Because you know their features, you can easily relate these plants to these groups. So in the next chapter, students, I will move on to the last kingdom of domain Eukarya, that is kingdom Animalia.